Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast, bringing you interviews, reviews and fishing tips. Here's your host, Pete Tigers.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Fly Culture Podcast. My guest today is a Fly Culture contributor, an artist who makes lino prints, acrylics and watercolours that you may have seen in our magazine, and loves to fish the streams that run off Dartmoor here in Devon. It's a pleasure to welcome Zoe Latham-Bean along to the podcast today. Zoe, it's great to catch up. How are you doing today?
Hi, Pete. I'm good. The sun's actually out in Plymouth now, so it's looking a bit brighter for the rest of the week. Fingers crossed.
Fantastic to hear. And the weather down here, and I'm sure as much of the country as well, it's been a little bit frustrating. How have you coped with the start of the season so far?
It's frustrating because I've got a few weeks off in for the Easter break at university, so it's been nice to get out early April, but it's kind of been disappointing this week because the winds will just eat your casts, and the rain has been pretty heavy going as well.
Yeah, that was, I know on the previous before one podcast with Warren, 40 mile an hour was something special to contend with, but it was fun all the less anyway, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Are you one of these sort of people though, and I am at the moment, and I've been doing it about 3 times this morning and hoping for the river to continue to drop. Are you one of these people who are glued to river gauges and you're watching very closely what's happening and planning your fishing around that as well?
Not as much as I probably should. I kind of, as soon as I've got it in my mind that I have the capacity to get away and go, I go and just try and hope for the best. So not an avid tracker of the river levels, although my husband is, so that's helpful. More the winds here, I think, for me, because you can usually find somewhere with some fishable conditions, even just getting on the water. So yeah, as soon as I've got it in my head that I'm going, I'm gone.
That makes perfect sense as well about finding somewhere to fish, and we'll come on to that when we talk about your passion for Dartmoor as well, but that's a very good point in itself. But you're off at the weekend, I believe, to fish in France, and I know you wrote a piece for us about France. Is that the place that you wrote about? And can you tell listeners a little bit about where you're heading and what the fishing's like? Because, of course, it entails fishing as well. So can you tell us a little bit about it?
We're heading off to a different spot this time. We're just taking a last minute trip because I'm based in Plymouth. We have it's the one travel that is good from Plymouth, which is a ferry. We can just hop on a ferry and go over to Roscoff. So we'll actually be fishing in Brittany next week. But the piece I wrote about was in Termignon, a small village in the Savoy National Park on the French Alps. So I expect there'll be very different fishing experiences and conditions. The Savoy was incredible, but difficult kind of fishing for me. The rivers were much deeper and they were glacial rivers, so the water was crystal clear and the fish were almost like a pale bronze rather than the Dartmoor kind of bug-eyed, dark brown, bronze trout. So it was great to experience that condition, but it was, in terms of the wading, it was probably a bit more sketchy, and in terms of the flow of the river, it was hard to keep fish on because as soon as they had gone past you, they were off the hook. So Termignon was fantastic, but also challenging for me fishing. And then I think the Alorne River, which we're going to fish in Brittany, is more like the rivers here. Some of the pictures that you actually see of the area, I think it's the Armagnac? No, it's the same name as the ferry, the Amérique area, and it actually looks like a large-scale Dartmoor, which is quite interesting. I'll be curious to see what it's like. And yeah, it's meant to be good for brown trout this year, but because the waters are all slightly wider, maybe the trout seem to apparently bigger, but I'll soon find out, hopefully.
That sounds really cool. And how did you are you one of these people who research really deeply and that sort of worked with ferries, and then you think, right, how can I work my fishing around that? And is it easy to, because France, is obviously very close. There is fishing there, as you've said, in the Alps and in Brittany, and I'm sure in some other places as well. But did it take a lot of deep diving to actually find some fishing and accessible fishing too?
Usually, as soon as we start to get the idea of going somewhere, I can usually convince my husband Brian to go somewhere for a trip if there's fishing. So it helps to have an idea that there's something there. And usually, as soon as we've booked that thing and we've got an idea that we can actually fish there, there's like maybe a frantic 2 days where we just kind of scour everything. And it's just trying to get a grip on what's the best place this time of year. There were some fantastic resources. I think Fly Fishing Brittany is a guide there. I don't know his name, but there was a really clear list of maps. And they have an interesting system where they have kind of areas and sometimes there's reciprocity, sometimes there's not. So that's a little bit hard to work out. And when we went to Termignon, we went to a fly shop to try and suss that out a bit clearer. But amazingly, a lot of our information comes through meeting others on social media. When we went to Termignon, we met a chap who we got in contact with on Instagram, and he just offered to take us out for the day. And it was just a fantastic shared experience where he brought along some genepi and some wild boar pate, and we just had an excellent day on the river. So lots of scouring, lots of resource, lots of maps, printed maps, so that we can just go and, we'll be fitching the minute we get there.
Nice. And do you sort of get flies? Are you one of these sort of people who likes to get everything prepared? So flies ready, find out if there's local patterns, source those, make sure you've got all your kit ready to rumble? Or are you like me that just sort of rocks up and tries to make what you've got work? How would you describe yourself on that front when you're getting ready for that trip?
I think I'm somewhere in between. This trip I've been more organised than usual, maybe because I haven't been actually out fishing. If I'd been able to fish as much as I wanted the last 2 weeks, I probably would have not been as organised. But I've been sat in the rain, looking at the rain, tying some flies based on some recommended patterns, which I don't usually do or have the time to do. So it's been quite nice to actually prepare, almost like when we first got into fishing. That's what it was like. We were quite studious anglers at the beginning, and I've kind of gone back to that for this trip. So it's exciting to have everything, I think, ready. I'm waiting for some wading boots to come in. I've got some actual nice kit coming, so treated myself.
Awesome. That sounds very exciting. I wonder, like you say, about being more studious, getting prepared, everything else. I wonder if that has something to do with, like you say, not being able to fish. So that perhaps, do you think, gives you a little bit more slightly narrower focus, do you think?
Yeah, I think probably the same as most of us. The priority is being out on the water. So anytime... I've been more excited about getting into fishing this year, having spent a lot of time, we'll talk about later, writing and being sat at my desk, which is not my natural habitat. So any chance to actually be outside will take priority over sitting and tying or reading. I'll be out on the water, out on the moors probably. So I think that's where that comes from. But it's also been a way to kind of get excited and get prepared for next week and give myself the best chance of catching some nice fish.
Nice. Sounds perfect to me. How do you describe yourself as an angler then? I know we've touched on a few personal traits, but how do you describe yourself? How would you, if somebody asked you, as I am now, I guess, as an angler, how best do you describe yourself?
That's a good question. I guess maybe I don't fit a typical mold. I don't know. I'm kind of chaotic, but not in like a literal sense. It's kind of just, I don't have set ways of doing things. I say that, I probably do. But in response to this question, I don't think I do. Often I'll fish with whatever's in my box. I don't really care about my kind of technical gear. I have one rod that I use most of the time. My first rod, which is just a Orvis clear water with a nice, I think it's a bat and kill reel. And I just try and make that work. So it's kind of a purist, but not in a material sense. More it's just me and my rod and whatever I've got, and I'm just going to go and have a good time. But I like to fish rivers mainly. I'm not much of a stillwater angler. That just frustrates the hell out of me. Unless I can actually see fish. I don't know. I've tried lots of different techniques, but I don't have much luck. So for me, it's about moving out through the moors and up the river streams. And I think fly fishing is just one of the many ways in which I like to feel connected to the landscape and also who I am.
That Yeah, and you make some really fascinating points there to me as well, that you talked about your kit. And one of the things I'm uncovering during these recordings of podcasts is that so many people are saying they do not need a lot of kit, be it flies, be it whatever it is. And you've summed that up perfectly. Do you think fly fishing is a pastime that can lend itself to overaccumulation of kit?
I think anything can. Anything that we do can. I'm the same. I mean, if you were to actually pan my camera around, I'm somewhat of a creative hoarder. I have magazine clippings and all kinds of stuff for either creating art, architecture, whatever I'm doing. And for fishing, for me, I guess it's quite stripped back. Maybe it's conscious because I don't like to be bogged down by the stuff when I'm actually out walking, because most of the fishing I do on the moor, like yourself, it's quite active. So the less stuff I have on me, the better. Like that's kind of how I feel. Sometimes I've got like a chain thing that you can have minimal bits hanging off around your neck, and I mean that's still a bit jangly and annoying, but it's literally just what I can fit in a small bum bag and carry, and that will be me for the day in my most kind of comfortable. I always leave things on the bank. I've lost nets, and I break things because I'm scooting around down hills. So it doesn't pay off for me to have nice things when I'm throwing myself and all my stuff around the riverbank.
And Dartmoor and some of these other moorland places as well around the country lend themselves to ultralight, really, don't they? You just do not need, I think, probably something. I always think, and I used to wear a lanyard as well, but as you well know, the weather can turn so quickly up there that I sort of wear the vest now only so that I've got a jacket in the back. Because I remember guiding up there. I remember guiding a chap once. And when you're guiding, you're not fishing, so you get bloody freezing cold if the weather turns.
Oh, yeah.
And I was sitting there in May in 2 fleeces. We were catching fish and catching some nice fish on Cherry Brook. I remember it well. But I was bloody freezing and having the chance to have a pack with something on. But generally from a kit point of view as well, and I can see where you're coming from now as somebody doesn't carry a lot of stuff because of the place they fish. But also it does make perfect sense. You do not need a lot there. And that's in the podcast I did recently. I wanted to let people know you don't need to tie loads of patterns. You don't need lots of flies. Just have a simple rod. It doesn't matter what you use that much. You know, you can get bogged down in it.
One perfect example of when we had to when we were thankful for not having masses of kit was when we were fishing north of Postbridge, and maybe it's one of those times when I should have been more diligent checking conditions, but we were just up quite far up the East Dart River, and thunder and lightning just rolled in out of nowhere, and there was us, the only things out in the landscape with big metal big rods, and we just literally had to sprint down the river back to Postbridge, just like running as fast as we could to get back to the car. But I think there's also a bit of a stubbornness on my part in terms of the kit, because I will, in my most comfortable, I'll probably only fish one dry fly. And I typically on the moors fish, I don't think so much about it's about patterns, it's about the way you are on the river on Dartmoor. And I think so I've kind of got stubborn, lazy with my fly choice and my kit, because I know the few things that work. So it makes me less, because compared to other fishing where you had to be really diligent about your fly choice and what was hatching at that time, Dartmoor to me is not one of those places you can present. As long as you present the fly, you can usually rise a fish if it's there. I in my experience, maybe I've just hit the magic fly. I don't know.
Oh, you're dead right. And, you know, even there's so few that I use. It was like an F fly, I think I use for a lot of the time. But I've caught fish on mayflies when the river's big. And, you know, mayfly, anything, you know, if they can get it in their mouth, a Royal Coachman, parachute I've fished as well, all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff, and they'll have a go at it. I think you've alluded to, you know, it's the presentation, isn't it, and not to frighten the fish away. But we're going to move on to that shortly, because you're giving some great information for listeners as well. But you fish with your husband Brian, and is that sort of, when you do that, is it that you will take it in turns to fish a spot? Or do you go and fish and wander off on your own? So, right, I'll see you a little bit later.
Usually we wander off, but within earshot or eyeshot of one another along the river. For me, I like kind of fishing on my own, but not actually on my own, if that makes sense. When I'm actually on my own, I have to be too aware of, safety. The moors is one of the most remote parts of the country, some parts of it. So I'm maybe more conscious of my personal safety than other anglers. So I actually feel more at home with one other person, not too far away. So that's when I'm at my most relaxed. And then we come together for coffees or nice lunches. But we also have quite different ways of fishing, I would suggest. Maybe. I shouldn't say too much.
I won't go into that one too deeply there from that point of view. So what is the perfect day for you when you're out fishing?
Oh, it's quite a chilled start, really. Get into the river, and I'm one of those people that I like to sit and watch the river for a bit. But if I do see fish rising, I will be very quick to get a fly on. But it's nice to just kind of take it all in and see the changing conditions, because I go back to a lot of the same places year after year and see how does it compare. Where did I catch last year? How's that part of the river looking? I also usually have my dog with me, who's very well behaved angling buddy. So it's just about kind of getting out there and just enjoying it for a minute before getting stuck in, because I know it's something that we might talk about later, but I'm quite intense angler. Once I'm in the river, I've been known to bypass my breaks, lunches, and it just drives my husband mad because I won't kind of get out the water once I'm in, and it's just kind of a one-track mind, and I'll be pretty glued.
Nice. And that runs with the conditions and everything else, but lunch and everything else is very, very civilized as well, isn't it? And like you say, a nice pasty or something like that, sit down, cup of coffee at whatever, and, I like to smoke a cigar or whatever it is part of it, isn't it? And that's part of that whole thing, isn't it, that makes that day special. And the other thing is, I don't know if this resonates with you, but I get still, and many, many, many years of fishing out there, I still get excited on the drive up, certainly the way that I come into the moor the other side to you guys. But even that drive up feels pretty special, doesn't it?
Absolutely. You can read a lot as soon as you get over the hill coming from Princetown. You can see the West Dart as it comes past two bridges, and you can gauge. That's kind of more my gauge on the website. I can see what the river's doing there, and it's done some crazy things the last 12 months where it's just changed different routes. It's become massive, and so the ground, I went out last week and the ground was more saturated than I'd ever seen it in terms of bodies of water that never existed before. So that's kind of a gauge, but also in terms of, I just remembered when you talked about stopping for a cigar at the river, I have been known to just get in the river and have a swim instead. If you can't beat them, join them, especially on a glorious day. I like a lot of swimming out in the sea and the rivers. So, yeah, if all else fails, just go for a nice swim.
Yeah, perfect. I should mention at this stage as well, a listener in Colorado, Jodie Barker, sent me an email, and on the Dartmoor podcast, I said that I'd had a sportsman's breakfast, and she asked me what that was. And I know you'll be listening, Jodie. So basically, it's anything but a sportsman's breakfast. It's not muesli. It's not anything else. It's fried sausages, eggs, bacon, anything that's bad for you. But I'm from the age group that when I used to play football as a kid, my parents used to give me a fried breakfast. So that's why I called it a sportsman's breakfast from those days. But I think things have changed. But to me, it works perfectly well. But does catching a fish, I'm getting a sense, and of course I know you, but I'm getting a sense of this. Does catching a fish make it special, or is it more than that for you?
I certainly think there's something to the first fish of the season because it reminds you what you're doing and that you can do it. I think that every year until, I think for me personally, until I've caught my first fish, I feel like, it doesn't really feel like you've got the season going. And that's frustrating down here because that can often be several months into the season. Just the fish could be staying up high in the rivers, or they can be bunkered down low on the moors. And but the first fish of the season is definitely special. After that, I don't really care as much. And I think the same goes for going to new places. Like we talked about going to Brittany next week, it would feel. I think I would be I would be lying to say I wouldn't be disappointed if I didn't catch a fish. But I often find that in situations where I've paid for a guide or I've paid for a drift and on a river, the kind of intensity of being like, this should be great fish, this should be an amazing day, this should be, all of a sudden I just fudge everything up, and it's just, I don't end up enjoying myself. So that's why going back to the kind of places that you know, and it's quite nice early season. But I often find those either trips that are maybe a day or two, or a particular experience that you've kind of put a considerable amount of money down. I always screw them up.
But do you find also, though, if you're away, say you're in Brittany, because you've got a few days fishing, you fish in a more relaxed way anyway, because it's not like you're grabbing a day of fishing. You're in effect there. So you fish in a slightly more relaxed way. And I get the bit about the guide thing. And I remember my friend Ray and I fished in New Zealand, and we took a guide. We thought it would be a really smart way to find some spots. So we took a guide our first day, and then we were driving through rivers. Now, we nearly wrote off our hire car and stuff like that. But I remember we saw a fish rising, and Ray said to me, go and you have it, you have it. So I took it. And the whole time I'm saying to myself, don't stuff it, don't stuff it, don't stuff it. Let him eat it because they're so slow at rising. And then once that, and thankfully I got the fish, you feel slightly different, and that nervousness sort of goes away. And even as a guide as well, the other side, you think, great, everyone's happy, you've caught a fish, you proved your credentials a little bit to the guide as well, and all those sorts of things as well. But also the pattern while I'm abroad is slightly different in that, like I say, I know I've got a few days, so I fish not in such a frenzied, frantic manner. Do you find that?
I think the first couple of days would be just excitement. So we'll be trying to see and scope out as much as we can to make sure we find the best spots to spend our week revisiting. So I think the first couple of days we'll be traveling around a lot to check out the kind of access points and the kind of spots that are maybe fishing well, because it's hell of a river. It's really quite a big stretch of river. And the maps of that place are really detailed in terms of parking and stuff, which is, I mean, in my experience, it's kind of a rarity to have that really clear kind of digital understanding of where you can park up and walk down and things like that. So I think the first couple of days will be not so much frantic, but excited to just check out the whole, what we've got access to and how we can manage it and the kind of things that we want to try. And then I think we'll chill out a bit and enjoy some other stuff there, because we're staying on near Lac de Dreneck, so there's water sports and swimming there as well. So, yeah, I think that'd be about right. But interestingly, I just thinking about what you said about doing a slow hook, because I remember when I came to fish with you in North Devon, and you had to be really quick. The fish was so fast, so that must have been a really different experience, like opposite to everything that you know and physically do.
Yeah, you're dead right. And that adjustment takes some time. And that's where a guide comes in. And I'd sort of read so much about, we're using New Zealand as an example here. But yes, I'd read up and knew that they took very, very slowly. But when I was fishing in Italy, I missed, I think, possibly the first one. And it was nice having the guide there. So I said, do you hit them quick or do you let them eat it? Because funnily enough, where you fish with me in the afternoon on the tour, those bigger fish, you have to wait on them to eat it and then lift into them, whereas smaller fish on dark. And it is a case, isn't it, of adjusting to that. And that can take some time as well, can't it? And that, to me, is deeply interesting, understanding somewhere different. It's not your own backyard. So you've got to kind of figure it out if you're doing it yourself, but also you learn from that. And it's nice having a husband that fishes as well, that you can discuss those processes with. This is what I've learned. This is what, and that's for me part of the allure of it all, that everything's a little bit different. I remember fishing up in the Malvern Hills for trout, and I was really primed. I thought it was going to be like Dartmoor trout, and they were just lovely takes. They didn't throw themselves, ate it, just lift, and you think, great, fish on, fantastic. Wow. And I'm really, really happy. But I wanted to look into your timeline a little bit. And how did you start fishing? How did fishing come to you, and fly fishing particularly?
So I actually got into fly fishing accidentally, really, is how I can describe it. My parents had got my husband Brian a fly fishing lesson. And when we got there, I drove him to the New Jersey fly shop because we were living in New York at the time. My husband is American himself, but from Indiana. And we were living in New York at the time for my work in architecture. And we went to this New Jersey fly shop and they said, oh, the ticket's for two. So I was like, oh, okay. I'll come along. And that was it. And the minute they kind of got us casting these tufts of wool across the grass, and, I was doing just as well as everyone else, it was like, oh, well, I can do it. And then they took us to the water and we were hooking sunfish within that day. And it was just, that's like a sunfish is like a little panfish that you get in still water in America. And they're kind of cool, stripy, colourful little fish. And that was it. We literally left the lesson and drove and bought, an $80 Reddington setup, and started looking at where the nearest bodies of water were to where we lived. And it was that quick. And we were both pretty hooked. Brian had always spin fished, and then this was his first go as well. So we kind of learnt to do it together in and around New York.
And how was the rivers? Because you mentioned about still waters and stuff like that, and I'm guessing it's some of those famous streams in New York State and out a little bit further. How were they to fish for that first time? And I'm sure many of those are steeped in history, the Catskills and all of that sort of stuff as well. What was it like? And were you aware of that history from an American fly fishing perspective when you stepped in those rivers?
I think initially, so in all honesty, it took me, I know it's quite shocking, it took me a year to catch my first trout. And that was fishing all different kinds of rivers, all different kinds of techniques. And that was us getting up at 4:00 in the morning to get to the river before it became, 35-degree heat and the rivers were too hot. So it was a real commitment. And to me, it still blows my mind that I had that kind of persistence to keep going, because when you're learning, a lot of us forget the pain of, bird nesting your reel and it just shouting swear words across the river, like in the dark. And it's just like, this is a nightmare. Why am I doing this? And then often we had to contend with people who used to do floats. So on the glorious days that we would choose to fish, people would also go and have a much more fun time probably on rubber dinghies, drinking beer and playing music. But for us, it was the write-off of them for that fishing spot. So learning to do it and to understand what I was even fishing for was a massive learning curve. I remember seeing a fish in the bottom of a river and just casting to it for hours. And I had no idea what the fish was, but I was adamant that I could get it on a fly. But yeah, learning was a huge part of our first year there. My first fish was on the Beaverkill River. And I think until we went to Roscoe, we didn't realize the significance of fly fishing in the Catskills, because you kind of pull up, we were camping, and you just see all these signs and it's like Trout Town, USA. And we're like, this is cool. Like, we're like early fly fishing nerds, just like, this is so cool. Like, what's going on here? Why is it such a big deal? And everyone in this town just knew everything about the area. And it was mainly the people that we met in the Orvis team there in New York. It was more actually, it was the Yonkers Ridgefield, I think, Orvis shop. That team there shared so much knowledge with us, just like kind of sharing stories and experiences that really got us on the map and got us into our first fish. So it was a fantastic way to learn and connect with others there. But it was mad, just these massive rivers. You'd have to trust a story. So, for instance, I remember David from the Orvis shop said, you've got to go down this road, turn off this road, and just keep driving. There'll be loads of signs saying, don't come down here. You can't come. You can't trespass. And he's like, just keep it driving. Ignore them. Just keep driving, and then you can pull up on the end. And he said, and then walk down here for like 2 miles. And we were just traipsing through this woods, thinking, this is just a nightmare. We're never going to find the river. And then all of a sudden, we just kind of opened out into this clearing, and it was like the most magical piece of river. And it was the corner of the Neversink River. And it was like awe-inspiring. Just this big bend, like a big glide, and then you got the big pine trees behind, and it was amazing. And I think Brian hooked his first rainbow trout there, and I knocked it off as I tried to hook it. So yeah, number one wife.
And so you were fishing these places and you were getting the information, and there's a couple of questions that spring to mind. What was it like when you landed that first fish? But also, you went that season, I guess, without catching a fish. But did it at the time dawn on you that, to stick at something for so long is really impressive? So do you think consciously or subconsciously you were coming into a pastime that obviously had affected you on a far deeper level?
I do think that, and I think it's not until, you said we'll talk a bit about some of my research, but having done it, a lot of it makes sense now. Spending a lot of time doing some reflective writing and learning about different aspects of, how we come in to be the kinds of people we are. And I think it's actually kind of miraculous that my family weren't fly anglers, because I don't have that like yourself. I don't have a family of fly anglers. For me, it was, as I said, an accidental introduction through a fly lesson. But really, when you look at my family, they're all outdoors people. And I grew up spending all of my time in the outdoors, all of my free time. The minute we'd finish school at 3:00 on a Friday, we'd be in the camper van going down to the beach or going across to France or something. And interestingly, my grandpa was a real craftsman and carpenter. And when I started fly fishing, family friends would come out of the kind of woodwork and say, "Oh, your grandpa once made me he turned, like on a lathe, turned me a priest. Oh, you should have it now that you're into fly fishing." And all these things that connected, like everyone I know in my family should have maybe had that kind of connection, but they didn't. And I think initially it was kind of a strange thing for me to get into, certainly from my friends and family. They were like, "Really?" But then I think we started making some video clips when we were out there about the kinds of places it was. And it was just, the places we go are stunning. And it's more about that for me, I think, the kind of places that fly fishing affords than the actual thing itself. Although I think the thing itself, fishing, is a part of it. I think when I've talked about the difference between like just going fly fishing and going for a walk, one is I've always been quite passive when I go hiking. I don't connect with things. I don't think about the grasses, or I don't think about the different ecologies there. But when you go fly fishing, you've got this intense focus and direction for all of your senses, all your sensibilities, the things that you know to look for. And I think that is what drives the connection. Whereas if you're just moving through a place without a kind of focus, it just stays that through space. Whereas through fly fishing, you really become a part of that place through the application of knowledge, I think.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. And also, do you think Dartmoor is special to you because of the experiences that you had in the US, those open spaces, like you said, walking through those woods and the river opening up in front of you? Do you think that's why Dartmoor resonates with you so deeply?
I think it's actually full circle. So I think it goes back to childhood days of being out on the moors and being forced to go for hikes and short walks where we'd be out for a whole day. And knowing that it was a place that my family valued, and being familiar and comfortable in those kinds of landscapes as well. And then going to New York, feeling completely out of place in a massive city, to then at the weekends doing the same thing as I was as a kid. Instead of going camping, we were going to the Catskills, learning to fly fish. And then I think coming home with that new set of skills allowed me to reconnect with Dartmoor at a deeper level. So it made it more special, I think, than before. But it's definitely a cyclical thing about finding ways of acting and being in different places.
Yeah, nice. Good answer. As I said, we've talked around Dartmoor a fair bit now. And what advice would you give people looking to fish there? And I can never speak highly enough about it. I think it is the wilderness aspect of it for me. It's the high up in the system, tiny streams you can leap across type thing that appeals to me, that is the antithesis of the lowland streams that we fish. But what advice would you give, and why do you think people should fish there?
My advice would be to, pack lightweight and make sure you always have, water or a whistle or a flare, because if you truly follow those streams, there aren't people for miles. So make sure you're safe and you know your way around. So have some kind of map if you're not familiar with it. I think just explore the rivers and just follow them around. I think one of the things that during lockdown, Dartmoor was really badly treated by a lot of people that weren't usual kind of outdoorsy people. So a lot of my favourite places became places I couldn't bear to look at because of how damaged they were. It's only this year that I've actually gone back, since probably COVID, to be honest. And the landscapes have healed themselves because people have stepped back. So it's kind of, you've got to treat that place with respect and know that the weather will change. So know your bearings, know your orientation, but also enjoy looking at the amazing wildlife. Often on the East Dart, almost every time I'm on the East Dart, I see a kingfisher dart past me. And it was someone else who I spoke to, I think it was one of the Jeffs, and he said you can hear the kingfisher beep before it comes. I'd never picked up the sound before, and I've always just seen the green and orange. Brian's seen mink, roe deer. It's just fantastic things around to just stop. And if the fishing's crap, just sit on the bank and enjoy it and look around. And I said, we said earlier, it's about presentation of flies. If you hop in on boulders, the fish will scatter. They will be gone. And I've seen massive fish, maybe salmon, I don't know. I think it was probably a massive brown trout because it was really dark, about 2 foot long. And I was taking my dad with me fishing, and he was hopping along boulders. And just as I was stood there, I saw this massive fish just scoot out from below the rocks that we were walking along. So it's all about your approach. And I think the last thing is that there's places on Dartmoor that are quite busy and popular, but actually they're also the places where the fish hole. So Belliver at the car park, it's just frustrating because there's so many people in there swimming. So if you can get there early or late in the day, it's like the most fish hold there for some reason, even though it's also where all the people are held in the river too. So the fish do come back. They're not afraid of you walking through the river. They'll soon rise again.
Nice. There's some great tips there. I just wondered, as an artistic person, does fly fishing appeal to you for its artistry? Is there a connection for you on that front, that it is, the casting aspect of it, the flies, the tying of the flies? Is that something that did attract you as well?
I think so. It's definitely one of the aspects to fly fishing that is fascinating. And I think we've talked about it before. You can kind of move through all the different facets of fly fishing throughout the year, throughout your life, and get interested in various parts of it. And I think that is a really, specifically for me, a really interesting part of it, and understanding the materials that you can work with. I like anything where I can use my hands to get to know a material. Like Brian will laugh at me going around a building and I'm just touching a wall and I'm just like, oh, this detail or this thing. And it's the same with materials, but also from a kind of, I quite like the found aspect, all of the foraging aspect of things. Like, what can you make out of seemingly nothing? And it's that side of fly tying. If you use, you see people talk about using a bit of their dog's fluff and tying the thing that can catch fish. I think that's fun. That's kind of cool. And I definitely can appreciate I love Nigel Nunn's flies. I mean, they're just a work of art. I love their representation of fly life, and they work particularly well around here. They're these fun, wild, shaggy flies that just encapsulate the wilderness down here, which I think is, for me, really fun to work to use some of those flies and see the way he makes them.
Nice. And did you notice that there is a neat symmetry between your art and fly fishing that allowed you to produce artwork that captures it so well? And that sort of leads me on to Devon on the Fly, and I'd love to know how that came about as well, because you do some really beautiful stuff that I know we've had in the magazine as well, some of your artwork in there under the fish art section. That symmetry is very closely aligned for you, isn't it, in that sense?
Yeah, I think I've always, before I went to architecture school, I'd always planned to be a painter. So it's just one of the things that I like to do in my free time. being kind of creative is, it comes across in every facet of what I do. Typically, whether it's fixing up our own house, or tying a fly, or designing a building, or looking at a city. I think having that kind of creative, when I say creative, I mean kind of, what's the word? Curious about how things are put together, curious about what things mean and what they can mean. That's what I mean when I say creative. I think for me, I actually started doing in lockdown, I started doing some sun printing, which is cyanotypes. And I had made so many because it was the thing I could do in the garden between Zoom lecturing, which was just, suck the life out of you. And I would get out between Zoom meetings and just do these sun prints. And then I actually started selling them and was quite successful doing that. And I think that process gave me the confidence to apply it to the fly fishing side of things and just make a space for that. Because I think that's how Devon on the Fly came about, was having the confidence to do other kind of creative pursuits, and I earned some money doing that. And then applying it to fly fishing and seeing what other anglers thought of it was quite fun. But I think, interestingly, a lot of my friends and family aren't interested in fly fishing. So it was kind of creating a separate place for that and partitioning off all the different things that I like to do. So yeah, it's got more of a presence in and of itself, because I think it does have its own character and sense of wholeness. Like the way I choose to kind of think about Devon on the Fly, it's the places, it's what bits of those places inspire me to create something, or what do I want to capture, for what reason. So that's why that came about, but also keeping it separate from other stuff, because I know, as I said, I think I have got to keep it separate, because otherwise all my friends will just be like, Zoe, can you just stop posting fish, because I'm not interested. So yeah.
Welcome to my world. I can bore somebody within minutes talking about fishing, and I never bring it up in conversation. The conversation starts, so you're a fly angler, and I think, oh, I've got them in my tractor beam now, and that's it. So I try really hard not to do that too much, but it's very easy. I love the watercolours you did of the trout that I thought were absolutely stunning, and there was a hint of, and excuse my lack of knowledge, there's a hint of the Japanese art about those, in the sense where the Japanese used to dip their fish in that. It begins with G and it's GY something, or about, dip a fish in paint, and I've actually got one on the wall behind me somewhere, but there's a hint of that about it, I felt, was that conscious or subconscious, or?
I think it's subconscious, but it's also it's definitely a technique I also can't, I don't know the name of it, but it's something I'd love to have a go at. I think that kind of idea of representation and imitation is just really interesting. For me, watercolours, what I've tried to do over the years is move further and further away from kind of realism, to just how few strokes can you get the character of a fish across? How few strokes can you put on a piece of paper to understand it, to capture the character or the quality of that place? And then also playing with mixed mediums like pencil or charcoal outline, and then just a couple of splashes of colour. So I do the same in filmmaking and in design. It's just stripping things away, because I think certainly at school doing A-level fine art painting, it was just about kind of each stroke had to have a purpose anyway, but it's just kind of exaggerating that to the core bit of the experience or the thing or the object. So that's why it's kind of, that might be why you also read into it, that relationship, because I think that's maybe what it is to me.
Nice. And I like the stickers with the flies as well. I thought they were very, very nice too. So congratulations on those. And you've recently defended and written a thesis of 80,000 words, which is an extraordinary amount. And it was for a part of your PhD, and you used fly fishing within that as well, didn't you? Can you tell us a little bit about what it was and why you used fly fishing within it?
Yeah, for sure. So my actual profession is in architecture and urban design, And one of the things when I came out of kind of my master's degree, I was looking at practices that had an interest in that idea of being placemakers or creating a sense of place. And there was a particular prompt coming out of my degree where I was asked to write about my own understanding of sense of place. And it was something I really struggled with for a number of weeks. And then I said to my professor at the time, like, I really want to write about fly fishing, but I don't want to write about fly fishing because I don't see how that is relevant. And he said, just have a go. And all of a sudden, all these kind of big, heavy architectural theorists made sense to me. As soon as I unlocked it in my mind about the experience of going fly fishing, I was able to kind of make some interesting assertions about the theories of place and ritual and the kind of things we do that begin to cultivate who we are. And places, in that sense, are the kind of spaces that we go to that we make meaningful for ourselves. So to me, the idea of architecture and fly fishing through that lens of place is intimately tied because it's through my own subjective understanding of those things. So through my PhD, I kind of posed some questions relating to that and asking whether other fly anglers experience a sense of kind of meaningful connection to place through fly fishing. And I was trying to extract, but not in a way that decontextualizes the ideas. I wanted to keep it a holistic understanding. So we used the sharing of stories, much like we're doing today, to understand those ideas of how we make places or the things we do in places really meaningful for ourselves. And it's really varied. So for some people, it can be about a familial connection. For others, it can be about a deep connection to who they are from their childhood, or it can be about a sense of physical healing, or what are some of the other things? There is a sense of feeling at home because you feel more comfortable in yourself and in your body and how your body works. And I think there's something to be taken from the fact that through fly fishing, we learn how to exist with other things, other beings. We learn our place in the river or in the world more broadly. And by talking about fly fishing as some form of ritual, you get to see different facets of it, such as like framing. So, for instance, one of the ways I describe when we fly fish, we almost frame a bigger understanding of the world and things that are going on. So on the river, you can see a change, and you can see a change in river quality or fly life, or the change in vegetation and the impact on trout habitat. And this framing will often give you an insight into bigger issues that are actually happening at a regional, national, global scale. So, and I think that's where it becomes quite impactful for people, and why a lot of us fly fishing ripples out into the rest of our lives in some way, because it's our way of connecting the dots. I hope that makes sense, and there's not 80,000 words in a few sentences.
I think you condensed that wonderfully well, and that must have been a Herculean task of 80,000 words as well. Tell me, what did you discover about yourself after completing such a huge task?
I think in terms of the actual concept, I think academia is kind of set up to make you doubt yourself. You know, the idea that you've defended your thing and you're always in this position of, can you defend? Like, what are you contributing? What's your new knowledge? And so, although my instinct was that there was something important about this, something fundamental about this idea of feeling good and connected to nature, there's more to it than that. There's a lot more going on than just feeling good in nature. So it was kind of trusting a hunch, trusting myself and my intuition, but also how, and I've kind of already talked about it, how, you know, fly fishing, it was almost inevitable. When you look at my backstory, my family, my husband, all those things that make me Zoe before I started fly fishing, you could have almost seen a convergence that I would pick up a rod and absolutely love it. And I think maybe that could be the same for lots of other people, that it's actually, if you're interested in things that are either creative or outdoors or give you a sensitivity to the environment, these are things that a lot of us, and increasingly people, are interested in doing, because they're all proven to be things that are good for your well-being. All of those things, being in blue spaces, creating, you know, connecting, they're all really, really positive things that give you a lot of resilience as humans in times of kind of scary, weird changes.
Yeah, nice. Did it make you feel any different about fishing? You obviously, like you say, on a deep level, it's always been there for you. But did it make you feel any different about it at all? And did it make you feel more about what we do and more passionate about it, if that's possible?
I think so. I was, in terms of, you were one of my very amazing participants that actually shared stories with me. And I was blown away by the kind of generosity of people to share their experiences and how they bring us together. So it was that connection between each of us was quite inspiring. Also, I think I was quite surprised how we each have our different way into it, but there are certain intersections as to why that bring us together. And I think that's completely okay. We all started it and we all have views on it that are different. But they all converge in some way on the water. And I think there was 3 quotes that I pulled out from 3 different people. And I think one person said, it's just fishing. The next person said, there's more to it than just fishing, isn't there? And then the third person said, nothing about this is about fishing. So even though we're having the same discussion, 3 completely different approaches to what we do and what it meant for them. And in actuality, when you understand that sentence in the context of their life and their stories, it makes massive sense. And they all have the same kind of fondness for what we do, even though they come at it from completely or seemingly contradictory positions.
Fantastic.
And I really like that. And I think that summed it up really well.
Nice. That sounds fantastic. And many congratulations. And I look forward to calling you Dr. Latham-Bean soon. So that's great news. Let's think about fishing as well. And let's say if you could choose somewhere in the UK to fish, where would it be? Your dream destination. And then let's look slightly further afield and say, right, you've got a plane ticket. Where are you going to head? Where would be those places that you would go pack your fly rod and make a cast or 2?
That's a great question. I think for the UK, it's got to be, just so I can understand what the fuss is about, go and fish the chalk streams. I've not done that yet. I'd be curious to see how that compares to my experience fishing on, because I fished in Dartmoor, but also in Wales and Yorkshire, around some of the kind of nice big trout rivers. The only place I haven't really done is, the southeast. So it'd be nice to see that. And also more of the border waters. I've been speaking to several people that fish up there, and that would be quite interesting to experience. But when you kind of see, I think when I've seen imagery and films of the kind of the test and stuff, which is actually where my mum grew up. So I said, why did you sell that house that kind of backed up onto the river? Like, how dare you not know you're going to have a daughter that would become a fanatic fly angler in the future? So I think there's that not only is there that connection that's where my mum's from, but also the kind of quality of the water there just looks phenomenal. It looks far more like a kind of green version of the glacial rivers that were in the Alps, similar kind of qualities to the water and the fish. So it would be really nice to see that for myself. But I also don't have much expectation as to whether I would like it, because I like that sense of discovery and wilderness. And I don't know if that would be there. But I think the history of that kind of fishing and that place would be important to experience. Further afield, I'd love to do some of those kind of big trips over in New Zealand or Chile, or just somewhere equally as expansive and wild. Would love to fish some of the stuff in the Dolomites or Slovenia. It just all looks great. But they're the kind of places that I've seen clips from, and I'm just like, that looks and sounds just incredible. Also reading rivers of reading stories about is it like Montana and some of those places in America would be pretty cool.
Yeah, Yes.
So everywhere, really. I guess I couldn't give you one. I don't have one.
That's interesting how you mentioned the chalk streams as well and the wilderness, and an interesting choice. And I guess that would be more of a toe dip for you to see.
Yeah, just to see what the fuss is about.
Yeah.
What is it?
Yeah. I've rekindled my love for them over the last couple of years, actually, and I've been lucky enough to fish them a fair bit, not always the big name places. And for me, I think it is seeing the fish and being able to spot the fish and creep up on a fish is really, really interesting to me, and I think that's why I've enjoyed that so much more. I'll go for a day now relatively regularly and enjoy seeing those fish. I like Stockbridge only because it's near as a fishing town as we've got. And I kind of like that feel around mayfly time when you're seeing the cars and the rod racks, and like you'd see in Montana or even probably in the Catskills when there's a big hatch on as well. That part of it. But I fully get that. And
cool.
For me, or for you, sorry, not being as wild, I get that aspect of it, but there are elements of that you can find when you scratch under the surface a little bit more, and that's where I tend to do it. But when you see the test or the itching or wherever it may be for the first time, and you see a fish rise, it is pretty cool to be able to do that.
Especially, I really like sight fishing. Like, there's nothing better than when you get to a river and you can see the rises. So I think that would be amazing to witness and to see and to fish. I definitely would like to.
Yeah, nice. All right. Well, we'll see what we can do about that. Tell me, what have you got planned this year? What are your plans? Are you sort of obviously after France? Is it mainly going to be around Dartmoor? I remember you doing the video from Wales. Actually, I remember when you mentioned that a few moments ago. Are you sort of heading that way? What have you got planned, you and Brian?
We're quite spontaneous with these things. We only booked Brittany 2 weeks ago, so we don't have a fixed plan. We're kicking ourselves that we're popping to Ireland in May, but we're only there for a few days, and we'd love to spend more time fishing there. We've got family in Cork, and we'd love to do some more time fishing there. So if we could wangle that, we would. But also, we'll probably spend a summer popping back to France, having bought, boring things like insurances and stuff that last a year. So we might make the most of that and explore some other parts of Europe, maybe down to Spain or the Dolomites. That would be really cool. And that's it, really. We may go back to America at some point because Brian's still got family there. And if we do, we'll probably make it into a trip. That seems to be what we do. We make everything into a fishing trip if we can. So that would be Indiana. So yeah, I'm not sure. But probably mainly around Europe. But Brian really likes bigger waters, so getting up on the Wyenask was really fun a couple of years ago. Although we went in, it must have been just before lockdown, and it was that week in the summer where it was like 35, high 30-degree temperatures, and it was too hot to fish, and the rivers were really low. I think we were on the Arrow or the Arun? And it was just so low, and we ended up climbing Penny Fan instead, which also I don't know why we did that in 35-degree heat, but hey, yeah. So I think mainly Devon, but also over to Europe.
Nice. That sounds a lovely mix. One question I wanted to ask you, who as somebody who sort of really began their fishing career in the US, how does the fishing scene in the UK feel to you right now, and how would that be comparable to what you've experienced in the US?
I think the US was cool because a lot of the rivers there are considered, like almost no one owns the rivers there. So there's far more of a sense of exploration and discovery. Like you can just kind of, as long as you can find your way to the water somewhere, you can fish it. And that was great fun. And I think from my experience in the Catskills, the fishing was technically harder. It was more challenging, actually. Dartmoor's got its own challenges, but for me, the fish there were so fussy about actual fly colour and things that I don't tend to contend with here. I still remember my very first trout, which was a rainbow trout on the beaver kill, and I just know that they were going for these Isonychia kind of burgundy colour flies, and I had like one, and I was on a big steep bouldery bank. The river was far too deep to kind of get into and wade, and I just had this one fly, and it was raining, and I could see them rising in the middle of the river, and I still just remember like casting out as far as I could, overextending my rod and cast. But yeah, catching a rainbow trout there was just hard work, but phenomenal experience. And I like the range of trout there. The brook trout in the Catskills were just crazy cool colors. I remember picking out one that was almost like the night sky painting. It was like blue and yellow swirls, and it was just like the most beautiful fish I'd ever seen. So, and there seems to be more of a pervasive fly fishing culture. Like there's more people out there doing it. Often we would go to these places and there'd be other anglers around, as you say, in somewhere like Stockbridge maybe. And it was also more diverse. There was more women fishing in America. It wouldn't be, I wasn't looked at like a unicorn from going into a fly shop. So yeah, it was cool. It was a nice place to learn, but really challenging fishing conditions in terms of temperature and the scale of things. I think we actually waded across one of the rivers in Pennsylvania, and I remember thinking, this is it. I'm going. Me and Brian were wading way out of our depth, and I just remember thinking, if I step 1 foot now, I'm a goner. But it was, just the vastness of the scale of rivers. We have quite short beats here in comparison because it's all subdivided up. In the States, it's, you just go and fish the river, and that's it.
Nice. And how does it feel to you over here, the fishing scene at the moment? Is it vibrant? Is it alive? Is it kicking and screaming in a good way?
I don't know. I think it's there's a lot of positive stuff going on with Fergal Sharkey, and environmentally, I think it's starting to have a better impact and making a good name for itself through garn fishing and all those kind of shows. I think there's lots of lovely kind of quiet accounts that I like to follow that aren't kind of in your face, but it's because it's about more than the fish. It's about the places that people are doing these things. But I think there's still work to be done to make it more diverse, more inclusive, more accessible.
Cool.
As with anything that's, I think, like this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We've spoken for over an hour now, and it's been fascinating. I feel like I've only scratched the surface, particularly when it comes to 80,000 words as well. How, Zoe, can people connect with you on your social media handles? How can they find you?
Yeah, so I'm either on Instagram as Zoe Latham-203. I think that's me and my personal one, but that's mainly kind of architecture content and, things around Plymouth and the sea. And then I've got Devon on the Fly, which is about fly fishing, artwork and inspirational places. And then me and my husband have an account called Across the Pond Fly Fishing. And that's all of our fishing adventures together. But equally, if anyone's got, I'm also on Facebook, Zoe Latham-Bean now. So any of them, or get hold of Pete and he can put you in touch with my email address if it's about anything else.
Fantastic. It's been great, as always, to catch up. I know we talked about doing this on the moor, but the weather's been against us. But I think it would be fun to do something a little later in the year as well. And we'll do some fishing, see if we can catch a fish or two. It has been wonderful to catch up with you. I wish you very happy holidays. I hope the PhD is in the post when you get home. And I'd love to thank you for talking with me today, Zoe. It's been brilliant to catch up with you.
Thank you, Pete. It was a pleasure. It's good to talk fishing with someone who's equally as interested and obsessed with it.
And I think most of the people listening will feel exactly the same too, that they feel just the same. It's been brilliant to speak to you. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Fly Culture podcast today.
Thank you, Pete.
Everyone, this has been another episode of the Fly Culture podcast. While we've been talking to Zoe, who's a deeply creative person, part of our pledge to support creatives as well, if you check out our social media channels, we've decided that we'd like to sponsor a competition for a fly fishing film. So if you would like to enter that, it doesn't have to be about catching loads of fish. It's the place that you fish, the places you love to go, the places that you, or the people you love to be around as well. Just send it across. It doesn't have to be shot in high definition. It can be on a phone. What we'd love is for you to capture the essence of what fly fishing means to you. So just drop me an email. If you have a YouTube link at pete@flyculturemag.com, and we can put that in and have a look. And we'll be paying a £250 prize to the winner as well. So that may be something worth considering if you're interested as the season's getting underway. But I'd love to thank you for listening to this episode of the Fly Culture Podcast.
The Fly Culture Podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter.